Hello, everybody. Welcome. Good morning in Australia, good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to our brain friendly channel. And this is where we discuss ideas to improve our brains and how we interact with the people in our lives, whether it's at work, whether it's at home. And today we are going to talk about change. I'm super excited because some people have been asking me about the topic of change management. How do we deal with change? And I couldn't think of anyone better than Samantha Zabik. So welcome, Samantha. Samantha is a highly regarded change specialist, a former HR director for many companies. And I'm so interested in your own life of change that I want to welcome you and ask you to describe us who you are and the type of changes you have gone through your life.
Okay, hi Sylvia. So good to see you. Wonderful to be part of this initiative. I really love the About My Brain Institute and I adored you since I first met you, I think in 2016 or something. Look, yes, my life has been one big change after the other. I was born in Croatia, then to a very mixed family, Croatian father, Dutch mother. Then we moved to Holland, then to US, then to UK, then to Indonesia, to France, to Spain, to Italy. So living and working on four continents, it's been a constant change, and no wonder I became a change specialist because I think it's also a natural progression from when you're working in human resources, you're working with people, and change is the inevitable, not just result, but a symptom of our working lives. So, yeah, the change for me is, although I don't like too much change lately, I think I'm just slowing down a little bit. But for me, change is always exciting. And neuroscience and the evidence-based findings and research in the last 10 years have been very exciting in my profession and how
Uh-huh.
we apply it. And
Uh-huh.
you have been a big part of that with About My
Thank
Brain
you.
Institute.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much. One of the things that I want to ask you is how is it that we all go through change in our lives all the time? Because it could be big changes or small changes, but somehow deep inside inside our brains, there's always this resistance to embrace what's coming, whether it's the uncertainty that a change causes or something else. So how do you use this knowledge of the brain and the resistance to change when you work with people in organizations?
Yeah. Uh, Look, I think there is one thing that in my studies of psychology, of course, so my background is in psychology, but I also do MBA. But in my studies of psychology and lately with the neuroscience with Professor Susan David from Harvard, it's our brains are actually still operating at the level of a prehistorical man who was trying to survive in the savannah. But we are now, I mean, look at the world that we live in. This is technological advances every month. Like you have a new phone with new things every year that is happening. Then we have the COVID, the pandemic, and there is this need to adapt faster and quicker all the time, where we are not really equipped continuously to do that because we don't understand how our brains work. So imagine if we actually used our brain, understood how it works, understood how to make it perform in an optimal way, then the change would be much easier to do. In big organizations, whether it's 100 people, whether it's 10,000 people, resistance to change is huge. People feel changes. I'll give you an example. At the moment, I'm doing a big restructure, and even the desk where people are sitting, it feels to people sometimes as an attack to their own life because they're losing something. So change is about loss, yes? For something to change, something has to die. I don't know any other way how to put it. I know it sounds very drastic,
Yeah,
but
but
for
it's quite
something to change, something needs to disappear. Yeah. So people are resistant to it because there is a sense of loss connected with change, whether it's a good change or people get sometimes depressed when they getting married. You know, you heard about the cold feet before the wedding, and that should be your positive change. Yes.
yeah.
So there is a brain resistance to loss. We are designed to move away from loss or hurt to move towards something that is nicer. So that's where the change is. So if people understood a little bit better how the brain actually works and what makes our brain perform better in the world with change, that would help us cope with change better in organizations and in our own life.
Mhm. Yes, it's very interesting that cognitively we know that change is going to happen sooner or later, and we still cannot control, in a way, the basic response of the limbic system, which is
That's
the
right.
fear response to, once again, to the uncertainty of what the change can bring.
Yeah.
And education to me is, like you say, absolutely essential. If we understand that that's going to happen, we are much better prepared to deal with the change.
Yeah.
So how do you see neuroscience playing up in the years ahead? Because not many businesses are aware of neuroscience, and with David Rock bringing the topic of neuroscience applied to leadership 10 years ago,
Yes.
approximately, or a bit more now, 12, 13 years. It was a big change, and some businesses really embrace this concept. So, how do we persuade other businesses to think about change implementations with the brain in mind?
I think not just in change, but in leadership as well, of course. The more we use science and give it proper place in executive education, for example, I find that leaders, when I present to them, for example, your work, when I present the About My Brain Institute, or I introduce something around Judith Glaser's work, or in conversational intelligence, which is all based in neuroscience, or emotional intelligence from Daniel Goleman, or any of that, they usually tell me, "Oh, I really like this. It's not the usual human resources fluff. This is actually science." We even applying some of the neuroscience in sales. Yeah, how to overcome the resistance to something being sold or something. So I think positioning the research in neuroscience around change, around leadership, around how the brain works, um, positioning it that way to executives has much more impact than just saying, "Oh, this is another development program, or this is another leadership program, or this is how we do change." And so the change methodology, the ProSci. I find usually when I say, "Look, yes, I use ProSci. It's a good methodology. It's great. I use Kota. It's steps. But look, I also use this neuroscience piece to overcome the change in people and to prepare them for the change and take them on the journey with storytelling, because that's how brain reacts positively when we use storytelling to explain the changes." So then I get much more adoption from the executive teams, and they say, "Okay, we really, really like this." So I find that, but you have to have the credentials also to back up the whatever we are positioning with change with that. So if I said I'm going to use neuroscience, but I'm not really a psychologist, I'm just some sort of a MBA student, then it's less. I think there has to be a solid grounding in knowledge and in education around change for us as HR practitioners and change practitioners to come into the businesses and actually explain what the neuroscience is all about. Because people get scared as well of science. Yeah, you tell them it's neuroscience, they think it's some mysterious
Mhm.
fairy tale going on over there. What are they going to do? So when you explain it in those terms, but they know also that you studied something, it's a bit different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was it hard for you as a psychologist to look at hardcore science like neuroscience and make the shift between what you thought you knew about the brain, or not much, because psychology really didn't explore the brain,
No.
to incorporating all these new findings that we find through scanning the brain, research, etc.?
Yeah, I think for me, as I'm by nature curious, so you're right, psychology doesn't really deal with the brain because there was not much research that's about the brain and how the brain works. So meeting people like you, going on to the accreditation with About My Brain Institute, studying a little bit deeper with science, so going on to these talks like with Dr. Daniel Amen that you introduced me with, that sort of thing. I am fascinated by the brain. And why I'm fascinated with it is we all have one and we take it for granted. And we don't know, we know more about how our hearts are operating or our bloodstream rather than the most important organ in our system, which is the brain, which is, controlling everything, your feelings, your emotions, everything is happening right there. So for me, I believe if we understood better, as workers, as managers and leaders, if you understood better how the brain works, then that would help us manage the change within the organizations better. And the change is not going to stop. It's just not going to stop. Did you call it the VUCA world couple of years back? Yes, in the world that is volatile and constantly changing and ambiguous, and the brain is not operating in that way if we are not sleeping well, if we are not eating well, if we're not exercising, all the things. So this holistic approach to me is really important.
Okay, so do you think that people need to be motivated to embrace change, or can change be imposed on people ignoring their motivation?
Uh-huh. Whenever I tried to implement change in my work as an HR director, for example, and what would happen is the executives sit in their boardroom and they decide this is what's going to happen. And then they tell the middle management, you got to implement this. And the middle management just goes and tells the frontline how to do it. That's the reason why change fails so often. 70% of change actually fails because it is not thought through properly. Change is seen more as a process and a methodology rather than a real approach to human beings and a storytelling piece and taking people with you on the journey and understanding the communication, understanding the obstacles that need to be overcome in terms of how people perceive and how people process information about the change. Yeah. So that's where I think the neuroscience helps. Andrew, somebody there is Russell Willis saying, could you further distill changes about motivation? Change is about motivating people. It definitely is about motivating people. It's about not selling people the story, but overcoming resistance the brain comes up with because it's afraid to lose something and taking the people on a journey. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that comes to mind, Samantha, is the pandemic has been probably the biggest change implementation in history, in how different governments, different leaders have made decisions that affect the millions of people and livelihoods and etc. What would you have said to leaders that they could have done better to deal with this uncharted water scenario that we have? Because at the end of the day, we can see how some people embrace vaccination, some people don't embrace vaccination for all the reasons that we know. But what would you have done if you were the president of the
Oh,
world? Would you have done differently?
I think for me, politicians look. I have to be very honest, and I always am. For me, the way this pandemic was handled was it was used for political reasons. Yeah. Instead of giving people the information that they needed to have about where the virus originated, but also giving people the freedom to choose what they need to choose. It's very hard. What I would have done everything differently. I definitely would not have locked anything down. For example, I would have worked with the people, with the nations, and worked on the solutions to the problem, like more vaccination. But vaccination, not forcing it, but really enabling people to understand why, how, what's in the vaccines, and how. To me, this whole pandemic just showed that we are not prepared for lots of big changes that are happening in the world because we are doing the same that what was done 100 years ago when the plague broke out in Algeria, for example. Albert Camus wrote about it. They just closed the city. So there are the knee-jerk reactions that people do without really thinking through, this is a big change. How are we going to overcome this? How can we really overcome the brain's resistance to impositions, to lockdowns and stuff? Did it work? It was effective, but it was also brutal. I find, and I experienced it myself. Being locked down in the house for 6 months. It's not optimal for human beings to live that way.
No. Of course, there are myriads of opinions about what to
Yes.
do better.
Yeah.
It's first of all, it's a very hard thing to be in a leadership position when something like this is happening. I don't think that in hindsight, everybody has a better answer.
Yes, of
But in the
course.
moment that you don't have all the facts and all the information, or you may
Mm.
have access to some, but not to all of it, it's very difficult to make decisions
Yes.
and to appease everybody and to help everybody understand. So, but one aspect that I'm thinking is that I have been observing is the lack of collaboration that still exists, despite the fact that the problem is bigger than all of us.
Yes.
So, if all governments could be aligned for the greater good, wouldn't that be
Yeah.
better? If everybody got vaccinated in the world, no matter how they do that, wouldn't that be better for everybody? And still, it doesn't happen. So,
Yeah.
what do you think that? Why do you think that competitiveness overrides collaboration?
But I think competitiveness overrides it because it's when people operate from fear. When people operate from fear, then collaboration dies. Yeah, there is no collaboration if you are scared, if you want to hold on to your patch. So, one of the biggest obstacles to change is the fear that people feel. Yeah, your amygdala kicks in, and it's attack on your life, and you have to protect yourself and yours. So when people operate from fear and from the sense of lack and from the sense that they have to protect something, then collaboration dies, and change is much, much, much more difficult. And we see that in organizations all the time. When the managers lead from a place of fear, they want to protect their teams, they don't want to change. So that slows everything down. At the moment, I'm working on a big restructure at the tech organization. And engineers don't like change. They like the process and they like the structure. And so I'm seeing very much that if I'm not actively every single day talking about the benefits, talking about how we can do this, easing them gently into the process of change, if I just tell them this is what needs to be done, nothing will be done because they get paralyzed by fear and they refuse to collaborate. So, and this is not endemic to engineering professional. This
No.
is in every organization. And now you're seeing it played out at the country level, at the world level,
Yes.
because it's operating from fear of the unknown, of the virus that we don't know nothing about, of how people, so just shut everything down, close everything down, and just sit on there. It has been effective in a way, and I'm very happy to see that 90% of the people in Australia are vaccinated, which means we're going to have more freedom. So that is amazing. Um, but it took us 2 years because we were scared.
Mm, mm. Okay. And when it comes to organizations, and we know that there is a continuum in terms of the type of participants that exist in any change implementation. We have the innovators, that are the
Yes.
ones that run with the change, no matter
Yeah,
what.
the early adopters. Yeah.
Early adopters. Then you have the pragmatists. Then you have the skeptics, and then you have the traditionalists. The traditionalists are the people that never want to, come on board. And I find that management spends more time on convincing the skeptics and the traditionalists than working with the early adopters and the pragmatists. So, what would you say to those people? Okay, so there has been a little technical issue. Let's see if Samantha can. I have a question for Samantha. It's a question, Chris. Thank you so much for your question. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how the world had to adopt new ways of living and working through COVID. We moved a mass of people to work from home, stood up new tools and processes through businesses in a rapid way. It's potentially. So I'm reading the question from Chris, Samantha. So if you want
Yes.
to give it a read and respond. That would be great.
Yes, Chris is saying, I would love to hear your thoughts on how the world had to adapt to the new ways of living and where to mess up people from. I was very, very pleasantly surprised at how quickly everybody adopted working from home. And even for me, I thought, because I'm quite outgoing and I'm quite extroverted, I get energy from other people, of course. So for me, I thought, oh, this is going to be really difficult. However, everybody, including myself, we quickly adapted to all the video conferencing, and it became very quickly the way of life. So I'm quite surprised in a way, but then I understood from neuroscience perspective, yeah, from the brain perspective, it's because you were not losing anything. You were actually gaining. You were gaining time. You were gaining less effort of travel. You were losing the horrible commute. Some of us who have to go for 1 hour from home to work. So you're losing the stress. You were losing all the things that are actually positive. So I think that played a big part in how we adapted so quickly around the whole world into working from home. So I think that was one good thing, because I also remember the time when lots of leaders would not let people work from home because they couldn't supervise. So there was that presenteeism, yeah. And now everybody's understood that actually people working from home do more work because you're constantly available.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you think that people are going to cope with going back to work now?
I don't think we ever going to go back to work like we did before. I think most of the companies have realized that really doesn't matter whether you're at work in the office or whether you're at home. The work gets done. So I don't think we will see a huge return to back to the office or back to the past kind of exodus. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we will keep on doing the hybrid 2 or 3 days at work and the rest from home.
Do you think that the lack of people in the office or the lack of interactions face to face could threaten collaboration even more? Or do you think that people will continue collaborating?
I think people will continue collaborating because I think sometimes, in a way, it's even easier to collaborate over the video screen, especially for certain people. I think people like me, I will always want to be face to face, and I will always want to feel the energy of other people. But there is a lot of people who are just as comfortable collaborating over the video as they are in the office. So
Okay, it got frozen again. So one of the things I want to wrap up this concept of the continuum curve, having people that are innovators at work and early adopters and pragmatists and skeptics and traditionalists. If you imagine a bell curve, we have the traditionalist people at the end of the curve. I was explaining this concept that, when it got frozen, what do you recommend leaders or managers not to do when it comes to trying to convince the last bit of the tail and really focus their attention on more on the people that do want to embrace the change?
it's the strengths-based approach. It's like when you coached me, for example, you say to me, Sam, don't focus too much on the things that you're not so good at. You will never be 100% in the things that you're not so good at, but you can really, really focus on the things that and be a master. So I always remember that lesson from when I've done the my brain I4 certification with you. So I think focusing too much on the people who are resisting change is not a good.
It's not a good idea. I can read Samantha's mind. And I agree with Samantha as well. We tend to probably put 80% of the time on 20% of the people, and it should be the other way around. I think that skeptics or traditionalists may come on board later in the piece of change implementation, but if you get the help of the people who want to move ahead, that's
Yeah.
probably where your time needs to be.
Yes.
So that
Most
basically,
definitely.
I was just finishing up. So
Yeah.
how do we raise awareness? How do we help people change? Because we know we can't change people's behaviors. We can only affect ourselves, and sometimes we are even difficult in adopting change.
Yes.
How can we help people to realize that maybe something that they fear is actually good for them? Or at least the exploration of the unknown is good for the brain, because the brain learns with new experiences. So how do we get people to look at themselves and respond differently? What would be your advice?
So my advice would be to seek a lot of feedback. And people are usually afraid of feedback because they think it's going to be negative. But my experience was wonderful when I've done the about my brain assessment, for example, because that platform enabled me to have feedback not just from my colleagues but also from my family. Like, the best feedback actually came from my son, and it was the fantastic thing that my boss and my son had the identical feedback to give me.
Wow.
So I think these were aha moments, as Oprah Winfrey says, when you go, okay, if my boss, who sees me 8 hours a day, and my son, who sees me every day, are thinking the same and giving me the same feedback, then I better look at that behavior. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think the assessments, the 360 assessments, but really good ones like the one that you have on your platform, are really crucial for changing the behavior in
Mm.
ourselves and in others.
Mm.
Otherwise, if you're just doing the self-assessment and you're just spending time ruminating, it's not as effective and it doesn't happen as fast.
Yeah, yeah. You're touching on a topic that I presented on Monday, the power of
Uh,
feedback on a leader's brain. I don't know if you came across that chat, but
yeah,
it's in our brain friendly channel, so you can look at the recording. And what you just described is, I got my insights when I got people that I love and that they care about me to give me a perception that is only perception
yeah,
of the day, but I'm coming across to them in a particular way, which probably is not that helpful, or not that it's not very useful when it comes to my personal leadership.
no.
So that connectivity, that connection that happened between the neurons of your brain obviously made you realize that you needed to adjust something in your behavior. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. But you see, I've done 360s before, but this was the first time that a 360 assessment, first of all, it was so complete. It was about my physical and my mental health. And then to have my family included and my friends included, not just my work. So it gave a 360 more fully than any other assessment that I've ever done. So thank you, the I4 Neuroleader platform that I
Yeah.
love. Yes.
Yeah. Well, this innovation of inviting family and friends in a traditional 360 assessment that we have used in business for so long
Mm.
came from a millennial. Because, millennials don't see life divided like baby boomers, or even
Yes.
Gen Xers. This is work and this is life. They see their life as a continuum between work and personal life, and they are always connected. So they thought that, this person told me, I work from home as well, and was before the pandemic, and my family and my friends see me all the time doing things that are work related and not work related, so I want to know their opinion. And
Yeah.
we took on this innovation because we thought, wow, that's a very different way to looking at a 360. And look at this, my first reaction was, no, I don't think that's going to work. People don't want to give, their perception. So my own resistance, even though I was the creator of the assessment, showed that, there was a negative response to someone else's suggestion when
Yeah.
it was very different to what I have done for 20 years. However,
Yeah.
I let that go and I thought, well, why not? And I think
Yeah.
that that's the best way to challenge ourselves. Why not?
Yes.
And just go with the flow and see what happens. Life
Yeah.
is full of trial and error and
Yeah.
experiment. And I guess that you have gone through this as well, these kind of
Yeah.
experiments.
Oh, many times. And the initial reaction is always a little bit of a no, that's not true, right? But then you kind of look. I'm always just very surprised that we as humans, we think going to live forever, and we lose so much time on silly resistance where saying why not, saying yes, saying, I'm open to this. What I can
Mm.
try, what's the worst that can happen? So, what would happen if I do it? What would happen if I don't do it? But I find that takes a little bit of practice, even for somebody as extroverted and open to experience as me.
Yeah. We have a question
Yeah.
from Deborah, and do we have a diagnostic within I4 to help people assess where they might be on the spectrum? Do you want to respond, or I can respond?
Please, you respond, Sylvia, because I think,
Yeah.
in my opinion, the assessment is so thorough that it gives you more insight than you expect, and
Mm.
you would get also an insight about your ability to go through changes.
Yeah, I would say that, thanks, Samantha. I would say that the competency of agility is where the behaviors, the traits, the abilities that have to do with change fit, particularly the adaptability one. So one of the last pillar of the assessment is adaptability, and it has
Yeah.
questions like embrace change and things that have to do with adaptation. So you can easily pick up. I wouldn't say that it classifies people in traditionalists
No.
or skeptics, but it will give you if the perception of others is low on the scale in comparison to how the person see themselves. So if the person thinks that they embrace change and they score themselves high on the scale, and everybody else that is assessing the person gave them a low score on the scale, there would be a blind spot. So
Yeah.
as practitioner, you can explore what this blind spot means and how people respond to change. And they will come up with some ideas about what is it that people are seeing that the person is not seeing. Uh,
Yes.
yeah. So
Yeah.
one more thing about this is that the reality is we all live on that scale. The example I just gave, oh no, I don't want family and friends, that would have put me in a traditionalist spot within that
Yeah.
change continuum. However, I am an innovator most of the time, most of my life.
Yes.
Sometimes, if things get me outside my comfort zone too much and it may cause some fear, of course, I may behave as a skeptic or a pragmatist. And but overall, are you 70% of the time in the innovator change agent space, or are you 70% of the time in the traditionalist part of the
Yeah.
curve? And that comes out of the conversation once people go through the assessment and discuss their ability to
Yeah.
embrace change.
Absolutely. But I just found the assessment so useful for self-reflection because it makes you think. And without the feedback from other people, you would not look inside and you would not start doing changes that are going to make your life easier, your life better. Change is confronting.
Yeah.
It is very, very confronting, especially if you have to change yourself, because we all think we are fabulous as we are. Yeah. You
Mhm.
would never, would never sit down and say, "Oh, I'm a bad person." You think of yourself as a good person, and you move through life without stopping too much to look at things. So I think this is such an amazing way of holding up a mirror to yourself and saying, okay, there is 10 people that are saying this thing, maybe I should look inside a little bit more and start on that journey
Yeah.
of change. Hmm?
Yeah. And I think if you do one of these assessments and you get a
Hmm.
good coach to walk you through the results
Yeah.
and to help you identify or pinpoint the areas
Hmm.
of improvement and also the strengths, as you said before,
Yeah.
working from a strength is so much easier for the brain.
Yeah.
Because, when you have to correct something that limits you, you have to kind of break that neural connection that may
Yes.
have been there all your life. So it is easier to work from the strengths and to find a new habit that is it can be
Oh,
more easily developed.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes, absolutely. And when I work on change in organization, I focus on smaller things because small things actually make the habits bigger and make the change easier. So
yeah,
if I try to change something too quickly in a big way, it's much, much harder and much more effort. But if I do small things over a period of time, it makes the change easier. So, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So
yeah.
it's like that way.
Yeah. And one of the things that I have noticed when I work in organizations about managers implementing change is like people don't know, disregard the importance of communicating over and over and over again. The famous Patrick Lencioni, the author of Five Dysfunctions of
Yeah,
the Team, he said that one of the things that a CEO or a leader or a team leader can do is to repeat the same message that you need to repeat 20, 50 times in a year. Okay. So if you are doing an implementation, it requires that people go over the same thing over and over until their brain gets it. And
that's it.
the biggest mistake is that people send an email announcing the change, and sometimes there's no follow up, or sometimes they say another email a month later. And we can't expect people to jump on the wagon and be happy about it and all embrace the change. So it's important. What do you say to the leaders that have to implement the change? What's the best way to go about it?
Well, when I work with executive teams, I would frequently give them a schedule of what they need to do. So, for example, now I'm working on this big restructure. I'm saying every week, every Friday before Christmas, we're going to have a 15-minute update. Doesn't matter if it's the same as last week. We keep talking about what you're saying. We keep repeating the message. This is what is happening. This is why we're doing it. This is where we're at in the process. This is what it means for you. So it's not just an email. It's not just a post on the internet. It's actually leaders talking about it. So I would have either a CEO or the chief HR officer or any other of the executive. The message is mostly the same because not much change has happened in a week. But the brain hears the message continuously over and over and then accepts the change better, almost by osmosis. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
that's what I say, communicating. But they tell me, but Sam, there is nothing to communicate. And I said, yes, there is. Just repeat the message from last week and add some more flavor to it. And there we go. 6 months ago, I was working on a sale of an organization, and there was a team that was being sold with this particular piece of the organization. And so we had weekly meetings with the team where I kept getting the same questions from the team that I would be getting the week before. And so that was a clear indication on how brain doesn't process until you repeat it 10 times at least. They will still ask you the same question, although you think you explained it very well, but they didn't get it. So, yeah, repetition is
So
important.
it is very important. As a bit of a summary of what we have been discussing since the start,
Yeah.
in case some people just join,
Yeah.
implementing change through the lenses of neuroscience
Yeah.
seems to be, in your opinion, more powerful than trying to get people to change behaviors and just keeping it at the behavioral level. So, what are some of the things we need to acknowledge? Number one, that is very clear in my mind, is that people do have fear of change. So we need
Yes.
to do something to address
Yeah.
the fear. Is that
Number
correct?
two, absolutely. So
Number
if
two?
yeah, number two is that to understand how the brain actually works, how
Okay.
sleep affects it, how a diet affects it. Number three, to make sure that we use storytelling when
Mhm.
we are describing change. So we can't just say, oh, this is the process that we're going to follow, 1, 2, 3. We're going to give it a why are we doing this? A golden circle, Simon Sinek. Yes.
Mhm. Yes.
Why are we
Why?
doing something? Give
Yes.
them the why. Start with why. Why
Yes.
are we doing this? Why is it important? Why is it good for you? Why is it not good for you? Why do we need to do this? Yeah. And then the other thing is small actions.
Yes.
So not shoving too much in an effort, but making it palatable for the brain to accept in small bites.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
because otherwise it won't happen. And then using science and presenting it as science, that will open the doors for using neuroscience more in leadership of change.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's great. That's a great summary. A couple of things that I would like to add to this is,
Yeah.
remember that a habit or a new habit is neurons connecting or
Yes.
creating a new connections. And there's a neuroscience principle that says neurons that fire together wire together.
Wire together.
Wire
That's
together.
right.
It
Yes.
means, they will connect.
Yes.
So they need to fire first. And one of the things that I learned in my neuroscience studies is that anticipation of a reward unleashes dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter of
Yes.
desire, of people wanting to do things. So if you keep the change exciting for
Yeah.
people, people will register that there's something interesting for them. So if
That's
we are
right.
moving everybody to a new building, which is something that companies do quite a lot or did quite a lot, to paint the picture that is they are going to receive something. They're watching it for me, and
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
because that will help their brain to release some dopamine that will create the excitement and the insight or the thinking process of, oh, wow, if I move to this building, I may have access to such and such, or I may be closer to the gym or whatever it is. Hopefully the change will have some exciting elements. And I
Yeah.
think that if you are running a change implementation, you have to on purpose build that in because the brain of people functions thanks to this motivation, which is, based on the release of dopamine.
Absolutely. And dopamine gets released also when you assure people that you're not taking away from them, but you give in
Yes.
something. Yeah,
Yes.
you give. So they connect that with feeling good. So I'm getting something, you know. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So,
So
particularly when the change is imposed and is not
mm,
initiated by them. If you want
absolutely.
to change houses or you want to change cities and it's something that emerges from you, is a change
Yeah.
that you want, it's a completely different story,
Yeah.
in my
But
opinion.
even that is stressful. Even that
It
is
can be
stressful.
stressful, but because you generated the change,
Mm,
you don't have so much resistance. Perhaps
that's right.
maybe you haven't imagined all the stress it was going to cause, but there's not as
So
much
true.
resistance as when someone in the organization wants to impose the change.
Yes, absolutely. Because then say, why should I be doing that? Or so I think making sure that there is a compelling reason for a change, and this is Professor Kotter. He from since '95 is saying, create the burning platform for change. But I don't like that metaphor because burning platform is no, but create a compelling story.
Mm.
Create the a really good reason why something needs to happen.
Mm. And when you talk about the storytelling,
Mhm.
I remember a particular slide that describes what happens in the brain when you only use facts and figures. So
Ah,
the areas of Broca and Wernicke, which are two neuroscientists that discovered
mhm.
these areas, are the areas that the brain uses to decode what you are saying. Okay.
Yeah.
However, when you share a story, when you tell a story, the brain activates and lights up in more areas, not
Mhm.
just Broca and Wernicke, but the area that has to do with the sense of touch or the sense of
Yeah.
smell or the sense of
Everything.
what we see, what we hear. Um, because, for example, if you say your cat, I know you have a cat, it was
Yeah.
jumping at the back. If you say my cat has a beautiful fur, it's very different than saying my cat has a velvet fur.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
So the use of, I mean, an adjective or
Mhm.
a poetic language or a storytelling and metaphors activates different areas, which
Of
give
the
the,
brain, yes.
the listener the experience of what's going on.
That's right. But
And
for
these are
example,
the
I'll give you an
results.
example. I'll give you an example, Sylvia. At the moment, the big change that I'm working on is a big restructure, and as one part of that, we are having fireside chats with our executive team. So we're calling them fireside chat to invoke the feeling of sitting around the campfire,
Well,
having the stories, the
yes,
warmth, and we try really to have it, even though it's on video. Like I would put the picture of the fire or fire crackling or something, So to get people into the mood, you have to set the scene.
yes,
It's like doing change with storytelling. It's almost like seduction. Yes, it's
yes,
it's the whole process of getting the brain to accept something by creating the optimal atmosphere, the environment for that to happen. Yeah.
yes, Yeah.
So you wouldn't go on a date and take people to some horrible place. You would take them to a lovely place, whatever. So it's the same with the change. You have to
Yeah.
enchant people. You have to tell them stories. You have to make an environment really nice for them to want to be there.
Yeah, I'm just thinking if you went on a date with someone and you talk about facts and figures for a couple of hours,
Oh,
it would
I've
be
been on a couple of those days, Sylvia.
it would
They
be
didn't
quite
last
breakfast.
long.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, everything is a combination. Facts and figures have a place, but it
Yeah.
cannot be 80% of the conversation. So the ability to share stories, to use metaphors, to use better adjectives and better words, and expand our vocabulary. I,
Yes.
I remember Dr. Ben Palmer, the CEO of Genos, an emotional intelligence company, talking about how important it is to expand our emotional vocabulary.
Yes.
We have 2,000 words in the English language that describe emotional words, but most people will use between 15 and 20. That's a massive discrepancy if you think about it.
It is.
And if I ask you how you're feeling today, most people will say, I'm okay. Okay, it's not even an emotional word.
It's not a feeling.
It's
Yeah.
not a feeling word. So there's nothing wrong with leaders in businesses using vocabulary that helps people, other people that are listening to them, go
Connect.
further, connect, imagine, feel differently, because that's what you're looking for
Yeah.
in change.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I think that's one of the most important things that people have a very limited vocabularies, especially with feelings. And we were taught in a workspace that we should not be feeling. Yes, you're
Yeah.
supposed to leave your feelings outside the
At
door
the
if you
door,
want
at the
to.
door. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And there's nothing more wrong from a neuroscience perspective than to say that,
yeah,
because the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that we call the CEO of the brain, and
yeah.
where our leadership capacities live, produces substances that make us feel in a particular way. So we can't
Absolutely.
really get into our brain and take that part out. It's impossible. So emotions and feelings are part of our makeup of who we are. Isn't that right?
Absolutely, that is right. But I also always say, going through change, the leadership is so important. So the managers who are leading change, and frequently we don't train people in how to have the conversations with their people or give feedback or lead them through something difficult. So what happens then is some managers, because they're so factual and all about process and about thoughts and just figures and facts, it's so destroying for people who are more emotionally needy. Yes. And can you imagine? I am a very emotional, extroverted person, and somebody who just stonewalls me with figures and facts and no emotion. It's like very confronting, and I will not accept the change from that person as easily as I would at the fireside chat with somebody who's telling me stories and saying this is what the future looks like, and there is a vision here, and there is um, taking me on the journey.
And a good proof of that is how you get the next job.
Yes.
You can apply, you can go to a recruiter, but if you have someone in your network that
Mm.
likes you or values you, you're more
Yeah.
likely to get your next job in comparison to analyzing critically or clinically
Yes.
your resume, someone that never met you.
That's
And
exactly
you
right.
could be a total asset for the organization, but they don't know you. So
That's right.
that means that many of the decisions that we think we do uh, based on facts, that's not really true.
Yeah.
Emotions are always there informing us, even if we want to disallow them or ignore them. They are there for our benefit. We just need to use them wisely.
Absolutely. But
Yeah,
emotions are data like everything else. I think,
absolutely.
you don't have to act on every emotion, but you can use it to sort of understand what is going on and where you're going with that decision. So,
Yeah.
mm.
So maybe as a way to wrap up this conversation, it has been
Yes.
absolutely wonderful
Oh, I
and
love it. I love
so
it. Thank you.
useful, I think. Yes. One of the things that I would like you to do is, can you give me 5 points of what would we need to do to take care of our brains in order to be more inclined to embrace change rather
Yeah.
than to resist it? So could you come out? I know I'm surprising you,
Yeah,
but
no, it's good. I'm very happy you're asking me that. So for me, it all starts firstly with taking care of yourself. If sleep is very important, I think, to get your brain into a state that is rested, that is ready for whatever comes into it. Nutrition is another one. If you the old adage, rubbish in, rubbish out.
yeah,
So if you're not nourishing your body, you're not nourishing your brain. If you're not nourishing your brain is not working optimally. Laughter, I think it's very important to have laughter daily, and friendships, family, wherever you can get the feeling of belonging, working with other people. That's also what makes our neurons fire together, making new connections. Yeah. And then honesty with your own feelings, using feelings, as you said, emotions are always there, they're data. So not being victims to our feelings, but analyzing our feelings and using the emotions as information. I would say those five things for me are really important to keep the brain optimal, for not just for changes, but to get you through life. Life is really difficult. Taking care of yourself, laughing, having family, sleeping well, eating well, you will have a good life.
yeah. Wow, you had it in your bag, all the five things ready to go. That is absolutely true,
Yeah.
and I think it's very useful for
Mm.
anyone to listen to
Mm.
that because we all go through life. We can't escape change. That's
No.
inevitable. Whether it's change in our relationships, in our jobs, or
Yes.
life conditions overall, to reflect on what's happening to us, to acknowledge the sadness, for example, if it
Yes.
happens. If something causes sadness, it's important to stop, to
Yeah.
reflect, and to say, well, actually, I'm feeling sad, and that's okay. Uh,
Yes, but I hate this new movement with everybody has to be positive, positive all the time. I'm thinking, but that's more stressful than just saying, okay, I'm sad today. So,
yeah, yeah. And, emotions follow a roller coaster
yeah,
pattern. Sometimes we're going to be up, sometimes we're going to be
got to
down.
be done.
But it's more about recognizing that you're down and looking for strategies that can help you go up again.
Yes.
And I always share this. I share it in my TEDx talk. I did suffer from depression in 2008, and it was a terrible time for me. Like, I don't wish it on anyone. It was like severe depression, and since then it has never happened to me again. But now I know the signs of when I feel
Yes.
sad. I put in place strategies to come up out of that,
Yes.
deep again, and not let myself go into
That's it.
whirlwind
Into spiral. Yeah.
into spiral
Yeah.
that goes down.
Yeah.
So we learn, and
Yes.
I'm not fearful of that anymore because I have learned. So the experience was very useful to me in order to progress in my evolution as a human being. Hopefully, I
That's
have
right.
evolved instead of
Of
gone
course.
down. Evolved.
But it's the ability of the brain, the neuroplasticity is
Yeah.
there. So you can train your brain to take you through good times and bad times. So I think that for change, it's important. For life, it's important.
And Samantha, just to close this, is
Yeah.
plasticity is the ability to grow new cells and to make new connections all the time. And it's one of the biggest breakthroughs in neuroscience in the last 400 years. So
Yeah.
one of the things that we need to know in regards to change is that the brain changes all the time. Even though we think, okay, this is the way I am and I'm not going to change, the reality that's not true. Like, we do change, even if they are minor changes. The brain
Doesn't matter.
changes as we read a new book, as we experience a new relationship, as we have this conversation. So for me, the outcome of this hour together, it's you know a wonderful experience because
Yeah.
I get to know other opinions that you have that I didn't know, and that helps me to learn more about change. So
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah, but I'm forever grateful for the training that I had with you and
thank
for our
you.
friendship. And thank you for this talk today. It was just amazing. Thank you, Sylvia.
You're most welcome. Thank you for spending an hour with us. And I want to invite anyone who is listening to subscribe to our channel. And as we always say, better brains create better leaders and workplaces. So
Yes.
thank you once again, Samantha, and see you in our next session.
Thank you. Bye,
Bye bye.
everybody. Bye.